Welcome back to Autism Spectrum Resources for Marriage and Family. I'm your host, Dr. Stephanie C. Holmes, and I have two guests with me today from the UK, Heather.
Hello.
And Natalie.
Hi.
Let me tell you a little bit about Natalie Roberts and Heather Parks. I met both of them in a chat that we meet in a Zoom room of neurodiverse coaches, clinicians, and counselors. And we were talking about some things in a group, and listeners, you sent in some questions of what you would like to listen to and are here answered. And these two individuals are like, we can help answer those questions. But let me tell you a little bit about Heather Parks. She's been in a neurodiverse relationship for over 25 years and lives in Devon, UK with her husband and 4 children. Did I say Devon right? Is that correct?
Devon, yep.
Okay. All right. I should have checked that out. Neurodiversity was unknown until 2012 when it exploded into their lives in the midst of a mental health crisis, which affected every family member. Ill from the persistent stress of trying to keep everyone afloat, desperate to find solutions, and losing hope that things would ever get better, Heather embarked on a journey in which she recovered herself and rebuilt connection, firstly with herself, so important, then her relationship, family, and beyond. Natalie Roberts is also in the UK with her husband, Pete. She's been married 25 years and known about neurodiversity for 10 of those when her husband discovered he's autistic. Frustrated and depressed by toxic online groups, amen, a lack of hope and virtually no solutions that had worked in real life, Natalie took a different path, led by her social sciences background and inspired by her incessant curiosity to find a way where there is seemingly no way. She busted neurodiversity relationship myths, reversed symptoms of Cassandra syndrome, and began to thrive in her relationship again. And then together in 2020, Heather and Natalie co-founded Loving Difference to bring hope and a way forward for neurodiverse relationships to more people. So we'll talk a little bit more about that at the end. So ladies, 2 questions came in for me. Every once in a while, I'll throw out in my newsletter, what's a question or topic you would like to hear answered or discussed by professionals? One came in for a neurodivergent man. He said, I would like to talk about how since the identification, it seems like all of our problems are blamed on autism or my neurodivergency. And while I want to take ownership of that, isn't there more going on in this relationship than just my autism? And
Yes.
then a bunch of, yes, everybody says yes. And then a couple of questions kind of asked the same way. Some came in, how do I tell my spouse I think they're on the spectrum? And then a kind of a second question to that is, now that my spouse is identified, we have adult children that we suspect could also be on the spectrum. How do we bring that topic up? So it seems like maybe let's start with the diagnosis question, and then we'll jump into the other part of the question of what are the things going on in the relationship. So I had Dr. Mona on one time, and she from Neurodiverse Love, and she talked about how maybe she went about it in a way that she regrets. Like she was like, you will get diagnosed or assessed kind of or else, in a kind of an ultimatumy kind of way. And so she said in our interview, she kind of regretted that approach. So let's talk about a general approach or your recommendations for I'm Googling. I'm between narcissism and autism about the things that are seeming to come up about my spouse. How do I even approach this with my spouse?
Yeah. Do you want to go, Heather?
I was going to say
with love and care.
With love and care. And I think it's really difficult. And I think it's very individual. I think it really varies. And there's a lot of dependent factors. I mean, many of which we'll probably come into when we answer the other question around what else is going on. Because it kind of depends on how well resolved some of those other things are and how good the connection is and how much trust there is and how much how much reactivity you've sorted out already as to how you might go about that and what the intention is behind it. Is it a kind of a blame shame kind of thing going on, or is it a curiosity or a loving intent? That will come across in your energy. It's really different. So I think there are some really helpful ways that you can plant seeds, but I think it's really important that it's a personal journey. I think it's a really personal. If you're talking about someone who's gone through all of life, 50 years maybe of not knowing, it's a huge thing, and it's something that then may take a lot of time to sink in. They may need a lot of time to reflect, a lot of time to process, a lot of time before they even want to look into it. Initially, it may be just, that they're not interested, or they don't want that, or nobody wants to be, I don't know, it's a bit like, nobody likes being told how they're feeling. No one wants to be told who they are or either. So that's really difficult, and they may well feel that they just don't want to know that. So I think it's, how can you maybe give some space around that? How can you be okay with accepting that that's not what they want to do at the moment, or persist at the moment? There's so many things around what else do you need to do in the foundations and the communication around that. I just think it is a bit of a minefield, I think, and it's challenging because I know what happens. I've been that person. I've done the Google. Oh, this fits. We know what it is. We need to figure it out. So you need to go and get sorted. You need to go and get a diagnosis, and you need to go and do that. And I think the encouraging thing perhaps will come out later is that there's lots of other things we can do, even if people aren't open to exploring that. But I think we mustn't underestimate how big a deal it is at a later age in life to suddenly kind of be stumped with something like that. It's huge. It's your identity, everything about yourself. And of course, the problem with it is exacerbated. It's a difficult thing to do anyway. But then if the other person was to start Googling as well, we're not really sure what they're going to find, because there is so much out there that's still so deficit based and still so pathologizing and medically that actually nobody wants that. So I think if there were much better resources around, and they were going to find much more helpful places to go and have that journey and that discovery, and maybe talk to others along that path, it would be, perhaps an easier outcome. I don't know, Natalie, have you got anything you probably would like to add? I'm sure.
Yeah, I think for all the clients I've worked with as a coach that have asked me this question or have attempted anything that looks or sounds like leaving a book somewhere, or trying to bring this up in conversation, or they have brought it up in conversation, then it just goes nowhere. I've had very many, very almost all of the situations of that go badly rather than well. So I think that's some evidence for whether it's a helpful thing to do. I think anything related to our identity, which is what we're talking about, is generally needs to be something we discover for ourselves. As somebody who has some health conditions, and I don't know about anybody else, but just the openness any of us have to somebody announcing or telling us that we are something, or that we have something, or that this is going on with you. I don't know how many of us are that open to that. And there is some, so it's helpful just to do the equivalent and just say, if somebody else discovered something that they thought you had, or that was going on for you, or who you were, or anything like that. I'm not suggesting with neurodiversity something you have, but it's that similar to me. There's similar situations. We have to be very open already to hearing that. If you think about how that is set up in any other space, to be very safe and very held and supported. But even for me, being told perhaps even about a medical issue, I've not necessarily wanted to deal with that immediately, or even accept it, or something. I'm like, okay, well, thanks for that. and I think we have to be careful of that, because it is such a big thing that we're potentially sharing with somebody. I think in most of the situations that I know, people probably do have a good intention about it, and often, because we're often very stressed in disconnection and trying to sort relationships out, we're often wanting someone to accept this information or hear it, because we want them to get somewhere with it, because we think that will change things, help us make things better. which again, I wouldn't doubt the intent behind some of that, but how many of us want to be got somewhere? And I think that often will bring up much more reactivity than openness and curiosity, for all the same reasons that Heather is also sharing. And there is a bit of somebody told me about the fact that unsolicited advice, which is kind of, I think, what this is, like unsolicited advice hits the same points in our brain as physical pain. And I think that's really helpful. Like I think I get that. I think I'm the same. If I haven't asked for some piece of information or some advice about anything, I'm not necessarily wanting it or open to it. So we want to really be able to venture into these areas of conversation from a much better, different place, I think. And it doesn't, none of this stops any one of us exploring what's going on for us in what we're discovering, whether it's about ourselves and our own neurodivergence and we're wanting to share that with others and disclose it, or whether it's Googling and thinking we found something else about someone else or what we're in. I think we want to get someone somewhere because we think we have to do that together, and this would make all the difference. And that energy is very different way to approach it, I think. So we would often say, now you know, or you think you know, or you have some information, whether or not it's that, you now know something maybe about what you're navigating, and there is lots you can do with that information to change your experience, whether or not the person that you've been discovering about wants to listen or do anything about it. That's I think the reassurance I want to give people, is that there's more you can do without necessarily needing to have that conversation.
Okay, so I definitely want to go there in a moment. So some of the key points I heard from each of you was, one, a gentle, a loving, and a kind startup. That's kind of a starting point. Two, know your intention and motivation behind it, because if it is going to come across as, now I have found the reason for our relationship difficulties, and you and this potential diagnosis are the pinpoint, that's going to be less receptive.
Yes.
And when someone goes to Google, I mean, there's a lot of, I always tell my clients, be careful what you're Googling, because there are some sites out there that are like, you're married to someone who's neurodivergent, in the relationship now, run, your life is over, so that person might be Googling stuff too. Okay, this person said autism or neurodivergence, and they get online and go, ooh, I don't want that to be me, so there's all this time and processing that it might take. Natalie, you made a good point about, how would I want someone to share information with me, kind of a do unto others as you would have them do kind of a thing. If someone spotted something in me, how would I want that? I think one slight difference in kind of a medical diagnosis is, that, which is a great analogy of how would I want someone to tell me, maybe, your hair is thinning, perhaps you have a thyroid problem, that might be, that might be something that might come up. But I think with at least the neurotypical spouses, why it becomes so, what's the word I want, intense, is the research we did in our book called Uniquely Us shows the average adult autistic diagnosis is 40 to 49. And the average couple has been to 5 to 7 counselors, where either he was the problem, she was the problem, and it was a missing piece that was never discovered. So this particular identification doesn't just have implication for you, it has implication for us, which might be slightly different than if I have a medical diagnosis and you want to bring that to my attention. So that kind of brings us to number 2, which maybe the points are the same. That, okay, so we've gotten this diagnosis for the spouse has gotten the diagnosis, and now we as parents go, but now maybe my 20 or 30-year-old son or daughter who no longer lives here, and I have really no control over anymore as a parent. I have less influence. I can make a suggestion, but I have even less influence. But, we want to share this discovery of what we've found out about us and share this for our kids. What do you kind of suggest in that situation?
So in my experience with that in my own family, it's really just been us sharing our own experiences of it and how we're doing and what we're realizing, and what difference it's making for us, like really sharing our story, I think, with them in a way that to the level that they're interested, and then I think we, to some extent, we have to then leave it to their own curiosity and their own interest to wonder whether this is something that's similar for them, or are they noticing anything that's the same. And I think generally those things, like little pennies, but again, we can't necessarily determine the speed or the pace or when or how that will manifest for somebody. Certainly I think for us it was quite a number of years of us, in our family, just sharing this news and this information. And then I think a couple of years later, a family member sort of said, that stuff you've been talking about, I'm wondering if maybe some of that's going on for us, or, but it hasn't, not because I'm pointing it out that I think this is you too or anything. I think it's just bringing these things into people's awareness by modeling or by speaking your own truths and your own experiences and what you're learning. Certainly in our online space where that is happening, that has a ripple effect, that of itself, finding healthy ways to talk about it, to be open about it, and also just to be starting to model a very positive experience of it. As you start to find the ways through it, then you are actually then presenting a very positive experience of these things. And I think that also is helpful to other family members, whether it's children, brothers, siblings, etc., to just be open to that and be wondering it as their own challenges come up. So that's been more our experience. Yeah. Heather, did you want to speak to any of that?
I was going to say, I would just say exactly the same. So I think rather than just say the same thing again, totally, just sharing our own experiences.
Okay. So a lot of things we know when we share through story or personal experiences versus like, honey, sit down, I want to share with you this thing that your mom or dad and I think is going on with you. Like, let me share something that's happened in us in this last year or two. We've discovered we're neurodiverse. Mom or dad has been diagnosed with ADHD or autism, whichever, or both. And, these things are heredity. They can go through families. Maybe you want to know that for your own family planning. But this is kind of things we've learned about with us, and maybe offer opportunity to ask questions. But then if you feel like they don't want to know anymore or don't want to look into that self, kind of, like you said, plant the seed and then kind of step back and let the curiosity grow versus constantly taking books or constantly taking articles or leaving things around that usually will backfire.
I think it's also just creating a healthy environment generally in your family about exploring who you are and what your identity, like what type of person you are and what you find challenging. And I wonder why, and I wonder how we've found ways to handle that. Or I don't know, I could sort of think that we started talking more about, for example, realizing that Pete and I had very different social capacities. So I have much more capacity and really value more social connection, and Pete doesn't have much social connection capacity. And figuring that out as a couple and being able to talk to our children about, and other family members about realizing that we have different capacities for social connection was super helpful, because then that's not us then just saying, well, I wonder what yours is like. The amount of family stuff we're doing, is that working for you or not working for you? So then we're just working more with the issues and the challenges and just who we are, and ensuring that everyone can be more themselves, than we are needing to find a label or a name for these things. Is just more to explore that. I think that has been a much more gentle and accepting and just curious approach to all of this as a family. And certainly I think consent as well in terms of even talking to someone. Like we'd love to share something of what's been happening for us. Are you open to that? Are you interested? And to be honest, with some of, like, one of my kids, bothered. it's not interested. So, but at a point in time, actually there have been some questions, and then I think it's just being open and ready to talk about it. So I think it's about how generally what's your relationship with one another, and how open is it, and how do you keep those channels of communication open, not necessarily to get anyone anywhere, but just to be ready and just be living it, and then they really get to see a really positive example of it, rather than trying to sort of get them to see something particularly, if that makes sense.
Yeah, that does make sense. And so I think I want to caution both partners out there. If you are the neurotypical spouse and you would like your spouse to explore it, an ultimatum approach is usually not a great approach. But also on the other side, if you're the one that the information has been brought to you to explore some form of neurodiversity, it is also equally unkind to say, I'm not going to look at it, never bring that up again to me. Because I also have the neurodivergence person say, if you ever bring it up to me, I'll separate or I'll leave you. That's not a great approach either. But I do hear, and I'll say this to the people I work with often too, is like, okay, this person just had some information. It might take weeks or months to kind of process that. What does that mean? Do I want to explore or not? That might be in that pre-contemplation stage of what does this even mean? I don't know if I want to explore it or if I can, or perhaps if they were bullied or, or called strange or weird or something. And it's like, oh no, those people might have been right about me. And so if I get this label, that might make those people correct, right? So there's all kinds of things that it could be stigma. It could be, like I was just reading a story today that really angered me about a Christian school who stopped Autism Awareness Week because it was celebrating demons and making autism an idol. And I was like, are you kidding me? So there's still that in some faith communities that is really stigmatizing about having any kind of label. I had to write the person. I spent all morning writing a nice email to that person saying, what are you doing? What are you doing? So with all that kind of in the background, there's a different approach. So there's no like 3 easy steps to tell your spouse or adult child they could be neurodiverse. There's all these factors that you both have kind of mentioned in that. But patience, love, and kindness and a positive intent is going to go a lot farther, I think.